Hey guys, Robbie here from CrossFit South Bend. Today we're going to talk about the question, what kind of relationship do you have with your food? Now really what we're trying to get at with this video is the psychology of food. So first up front, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I don't work with eating disorders, I have a layman's idea of various eating disorders, but I have no professional background with these things, and that won't be the subject of today's talk. Rather, what we're going to talk about today is the fact that even without an eating disorder, which is typically what people think of as an unhealthy relationship with food, you can still have an unhealthy relationship with food. And I would say many people today, even in addition to those who have diagnosed eating disorders, have a very unhealthy relationship with food. So we're going to talk about healthy relationships with food, unhealthy relationships with food, and how to get from maybe an unhealthy relationship to a healthy relationship. So, like I said, one of the main things we're going to be talking about today is the psychology of food. So you can have an unhealthy relationship with food even if you don't have a diagnosed eating disorder, even if you don't have an eating disorder that has yet to be diagnosed. So what do I mean by that? I mean that even if you're not someone who binge eats or has anorexia or bulimia, you can have an unhealthy relationship with food. Well, what sort of things constitute an unhealthy relationship with food? Well, I would say the main one is psychological addiction or psychological dependence, and more of us than we care to admit have this in our lives. And I will certainly be the first to admit that for the vast majority of my adult life, in one way or another, I have been addicted to really not good food. For more years than I have been a healthy eater, I have been an unhealthy eater. And in particular, I've been someone who has been psychologically addicted to certain foods. Foods that you feel dependent on, foods that you go to when you're having a bad day to ease emotions that you don't necessarily want to deal with, foods to deal with hard times in your life, things like that. Those are some examples of unhealthy types of relationships with food. And a lot of us have this today. We look to food as a psychological comfort. We say, oh, well, the infamous cheat day, right? Well, I've been so good all week. I guess I get to cheat on the weekend. And it's funny, as others have said, that we use the same word for marital infidelity and academic dishonesty, which are two very serious things for something where you're just, having food that doesn't necessarily correlate with what you're trying to eat. We have this very odd relationship with food where we sometimes view it as reward and punishment, which I'll talk about in just a second. So it's okay to enjoy food. There's nothing wrong with enjoying food. You should enjoy food, but what's not okay is psychological addiction. And I have to absolutely give credit where credit's due. There are many people before me who have had this type of idea, but one in particular that we have partnered with and we're really big fans of is Whole 9 Life and the Whole 30. I think more so than most of the people in the paleo world, these people have, Dallas and Melissa Hartwig have brought to the fore this idea that you want to have a healthy psychological relationship with food. And there are many other aspects to having a healthy relationship with food, like eating nutrient-dense food and having good, healthy blood sugar levels and, minimizing inflammation and all the rest of that. But psychological addiction is a really important one. And again, you do not need to have a diagnosed or even a yet to be diagnosed eating disorder to have an unhealthy psychological relationship with food. So let's delve more deeply into this. So the headline here is that food should be delicious and nourishing, but not addictive. And we all intuitively know the difference. And I'm gonna point it out for you, and you'll get it once I show you the difference here. So for you it may not be steak, roasted broccoli, and roasted potatoes. For me it is. That's a really delicious meal that I really enjoy. I look forward to having, but in no way, shape, or form have I ever been, or nor will I ever be, addicted to steak, roasted broccoli, and roasted potatoes. Ever. Why? Because those foods don't have addictive qualities about them, aside from potentially the, somewhat of a blood sugar rise that you're going to get from eating white potatoes, which can potentially lead to addictive qualities, but really not compared to other things. you're really not going to get anything addictive about these foods. There's just nothing. There's nothing from a chemical perspective that's going to be addictive about them. They're supposed to be delicious. Your body is supposed to need certain things about them, and it's certainly the case that if you went for many days without eating, you would want to eat these things because you are hungry. But again, as other people have pointed out, there's a difference between hunger, physiological hunger, and needing to eat food, and craving. Craving is things like candy. Now for you, it may be different. For me, my two big vices are pizza and chocolate chip cookies by far. Those are the two big ones for me. Other people, it's wine. Other people, it's chocolate. Those things that you can't necessarily, or you have a very difficult time giving up or saying goodbye to. And that's actually one of the surest signs that if you have that type of relationship with a food, that you need to give it up for 30 days or maybe even more, that you maybe become too dependent on it. So candy, ice cream, fast food, all these things call out to us. When we're having we're having a really rough day, or we're really tired, or we had a fight with a significant other, or a bad day at work, these are the things calling to us, not necessarily when we're actually hungry. That's one of the most interesting things, is that you could just have eaten an entire meal like this, the steak, roasted broccoli, and roasted potatoes, and yet still be craving, what's for dessert? Or even craving something like fast food after you eat that meal. That's the surest sign that what you're feeling is craving, not physiological hunger. Now, I'm willing to venture that a lot of people watching this video have not actually experienced true physiological hunger. And if you have experienced it, I apologize. But most of us living in the Western world today have not experienced true physiological hunger, like going without eating for multiple days or even weeks in a row. That's true hunger. Craving is jonesing for food. That's a different thing. And most of us, when we need, our coffee in the morning, or we need that Danish or that bagel or what have you, that's craving. And there's a very, very big difference between the two. So food should be enjoyable. I'm sure you can think of something like this or similar to this that you enjoy and that's nourishing to your body, but food should not be addictive. And this is one of the main problems with processed foods, sugar, soda, alcohol, is that they are all in one way or another psychologically addictive. Whereas quality protein, veggies, healthy fats, fruits, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, all the things we've been talking about all along with Wellness Wednesday are not psychologically addictive. They are delicious, they're nourishing, they're fantastic, but they are not psychologically addictive. They don't, I don't know anyone who wakes up in the middle of the night dreaming of white potatoes or broccoli or something like that. So it's almost always candy or ice cream or these other things that actually activate the addictive processes in our brain and call us to come back and be dependent on them. So one other thing I want to point out in this regard is, sometimes people bring up this distinction between living to eat and eating to live. So living to eat is really just, I guess for lack of a better example, this is what Mario Batali does. So I love Mario Batali. I watch The Chew. It's a great show on ABC multiple times a week. It's a great cooking show. Mario Batali's a big dude, probably weighing around 300 pounds. His goal with life is to make the best, most delicious tasting food he can make, and then eat it and have a good time. And he really doesn't care so much about the health consequences, and that's okay. Everyone's allowed to make their own personal choice. But that's really the example of live to eat. And you don't need to be that heavy for you to be on that side of the spectrum. This is a spectrum. Live to eat is over here and eat to live is over here. And we want to be somewhere in the middle. And most of us, or actually I would say even closer to the eat to live side than maybe the live to eat side. And most of us are very far on the live to eat side in today's culture with all the processed foods, sugar, soda, alcohol, and all these fast food establishments. We are very far on the live to eat side. So now you don't want to go all the way over to the eat to live side either. That's too much. That's where food is just nourishment and there's no communal aspect to it, or religious or social aspect to it, or no celebratory aspect to it. If you've ever heard of the product Soylent, there's a Silicon Valley company, believe it or not, that actually is trying to invent this soy shake that contains all the nutrients that you would technically ever need in a day. I'm just gonna be honest here. I think it's one of the dumbest ideas out there. I think it totally misses the point of food. Yes, we need food for nourishment, but food should be enjoyed. That's going way to the side of eat to live. I just think that's just full disclosure, completely idiotic idea in so many different ways. Food should not just be about nutrients, even assuming you could get it from a soy shake, which is a highly dubious claim. But even if you could, there are social aspects to food, there are communal aspects, there are celebratory aspects. So we want to have a little bit of both of these things. But again, most of us in today's culture are very far on the live to eat side versus the eat to live side. And I would say, frankly, I think, if you were to make a spectrum right here, and this is live to eat, and this is eat to live, I think all of us need to be a little bit closer to eat to live than live to eat. Probably not exactly in the middle. Interesting little philosophical side note, my background is in philosophy. Aristotle famously said that, when it came to moderating our pleasure, humans tend to be much more on the side of pleasure seeking than not. So when trying to strike a balance between completely avoiding pleasure and seeking pleasure, we should go a little bit closer to avoiding pleasure, but not all the way because we're so predisposed to seeking pleasure. And I think a very similar thing holds here. We are all predisposed because of our genetics and our current environment to live to eat. And, we definitely want to maintain that communal, social enjoyment aspect of food, but most of us are very far on this side where we're not eating much in the way of nutrients and we're not really nourishing our body. So I would say we need to, on balance, be a little bit closer to the eat to live side rather than the other side. Now, let's talk about food as reward and punishment. Now, again, I'm not a therapist. I don't treat eating disorders or anything like that. You should always see a specialist if you think you have one. But food with psychological baggage can create a lot of damage. And, part of this is that we grow up with this psychological baggage being carried with us. You get cake for your birthday. You got straight A's. Okay, well, here's, your favorite candy, or we're going to go out to dinner or something like that. And that's how we celebrate anniversaries and big milestones is with food. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong to this social, communal, in some cases religious aspect of sharing food and celebrating with one another. What becomes bad is when you use that food in a way that, maybe is used as a crutch for a bad day or an argument with a significant other, or is used as a way to reward yourself. The infamous cheat day. Wow, I've been good for 5 days, so I'm gonna go pig out for a day on Saturday or Sunday or something like that. That is not a healthy relationship with food. That's basically a recipe for an unhealthy relationship with food. And it's one of the big reasons why we're not gigantic fans here of cheat days in general. I hate the name. And in addition to that, I think while you should celebrate for legitimate special occasions, which we'll talk about in other videos, like your birthday, a close family member's birthday, an anniversary, a promotion, things like that, not a random Wednesday when your coworker brings donuts. You should definitely celebrate for those special occasions. We shouldn't be so far gone that we use food as some sort of reward or crutch that comes with this psychological baggage that can eventually be damaging. One other thing I want to talk about before we wrap up and talk about how you can actually have a good psychological relationship with food is food today. So, in one sense, we're at this unprecedented moment in food history, right? For almost all of human history, famine was a major concern, and it still is today. There are definitely parts of the world where it still is today. But in the Western world, more people will die from overconsumption of food than from famine. Furthermore, the current generation and the next generation are looking like it might be the case that we might actually live fewer years than our predecessors, which, as far as we know, has never happened in human history. There's always been some sort of leap in the amount of years lived due to technological advances and all sorts of different things. So what's happened today is we have a really unprecedented food moment where, on the one hand, we've got this overabundance of food, which does cure some issues, but it leads to us over consuming food. Furthermore, food today has been engineered to be addictive. This is crucial to understand. With Lay's, you may be too young to remember, hopefully not. I'm sure a lot of you watching remember, just like I do, the fact that Lay's, I think it was in the early 90s, ran a campaign that said, "Bet you can't eat just one." Well, that's because it's been engineered to make it such that you want to eat more. All these foods, processed foods, restaurant foods, candy, ice cream, all the rest of these things have been loaded with things to make you want to eat more. And you might say, oh, well, free will, you can choose to stop whenever you want. And you're right. We do have free will, we can stop what we want. But you're wrong if you think that certain foods don't predispose you more, biologically speaking, to seeking them out and being addicted to them than others. That's just false. So biologically speaking, steak is not addictive and roasted broccoli is not addictive, whereas a candy bar or ice cream is psychologically addictive. Now I want to talk about one item in particular that, if you haven't seen this video, you should go Google it, watch it on YouTube. The New York Times did a feature on something called the Doritos Locos Taco. This is a product that Taco Bell came out with not too long ago. And basically what they talk about in the video is how the food engineers, how they scientifically basically engineered the taco shell, which is made of basically Dorito chips, to be the perfect amount of certain elements that makes it so that you want to keep eating. So one of the things they talk about in the video is how none of the flavors are so overwhelming that they trip your satiety signals. And your satiety signals are the things that basically say, I'm full now, let me stop eating. So they've scientifically engineered it in such a way so that you don't actually ever get that signal. And they've scientifically engineered it in such a way that it has this psychological hold on you that makes it much more addictive than any real whole food could ever be. This is the case with artificial sweeteners too. Sugar is decently addictive by itself, but when you have something 1,000 times or 10,000 times as sweet as sugar in the form of artificial sweeteners, that makes it even more addictive. So food today is really unique in that they're trying to get you addicted to it. The bottom line depends on it. When you look at processed foods, when you look at food science that has been developed over the past 50, 60, 70 years, you will see that there are people at these large corporations studying this stuff and trying to make the food as addictive as possible. There's nothing wrong with a corporation making a food delicious, but it's starting to slide into the unethical realm when a company focuses on making a food that is pretty horrendous for you and tries to get you to eat more of it. It's got similar overtones to what went on with the cigarette companies. So, okay, we've talked about a lot of different things. You might be asking yourself, well, how do I actually have a healthy relationship with food? How do I establish a good relationship with food? The headline, and I'm probably going to sound like a broken record here because we keep saying this over and over again with regard to blood sugar imbalances or losing weight or getting enough nutrition or minimizing inflammation. That's because all roads lead back to the same thing. Eat real whole food. Food that your grandparents and great-grandparents would have recognized as food. Quality protein, lots of veggies, healthy fats, fruits, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, and avoid your processed foods, your sugar, your soda, and your alcohol, and you'll go a long way to having a more healthy psychological relationship with food. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.